Officer tried to arrest black woman, then she dialed the White House. The night air was heavy with quiet as she drove, the hum of the tires against the asphalt blending with the low rhythm of the radio. Streetlights passed in steady intervals, casting brief golden glows across the dashboard before fading back into darkness. She kept her hands firm on the wheel, posture upright, her movements calm and deliberate. The day had been long, but she carried herself with the same composure she wore in every part of her life. Her suit jacket rested neatly on the passenger seat, the faint smell of perfume still clinging to the fabric. She was tired, but she was not careless. In the mirror, flashing lights cut through the darkness without warning. Red and blue pulsed against the night sky, filling her chest with a sudden tightness. She signaled immediately, easing the car toward the shoulder of the road, each movement precise. The vehicle slowed to a stop, the engine's hum fading into silence. She placed her hands on the steering wheel, visible and steady, her breath measured. The cruiser pulled in behind her, headlights washing across the back of her car. A door slammed, sharp against the quiet street. The officer approached quickly, his steps loud, his body rigid with hostility. He did not pause, did not greet her, did not offer the courtesy of explanation. His flashlight beam struck her face through the window, forcing her to squint against the sudden brightness. "License and registration!" he snapped, his tone clipped, already edged with accusation. He leaned closer than necessary, the light trembling in his hand as if meant to intimidate. She nodded calmly, speaking with clarity. "I am reaching for my bag now," she said, her voice steady, careful to announce each action. Her hand moved slowly to the passenger seat, retrieving the leather folder that held her documents. She passed them through the window with precision, her eyes meeting his without fear. The officer snatched them quickly, glancing over the papers with a scowl. His posture carried no hint of professionalism, no sign of the respect owed to a citizen complying with the law. He circled the car once, his boots crunching against the gravel, then returned to the window. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was less interested in her answer than in asserting control. She shook her head lightly, her voice still even. "No, officer, I do not." He narrowed his eyes, leaning closer again, his shadow spilling across her lap. "You were driving suspiciously. Too slow, like you had something to hide." The words carried an edge that went beyond routine traffic stops. They dripped with hostility, the kind meant to unnerve, to remind her of his power. She sat still, the calm in her demeanor unbroken. Inside, her thoughts moved quickly, analyzing each word, each gesture, but on the surface, she remained composed. The flashing lights still spun behind her, painting the night in restless colors, but her presence inside the car was steady, anchored by dignity. The scene was set, and though the officer believed himself in control, the balance of power was already shifting in ways he could not yet see. The officer leaned closer to the window, his flashlight still glaring across her face, though the street was already lit by his spinning patrol lights. His questions came fast, each one sharper than the last, designed not to seek truth but to unsettle. "Where are you coming from? Why are you out here so late? Who did you meet?" She opened her mouth to respond, choosing her words with care, but each time he cut her off, twisting her answers before she could finish. He interrupted with accusations that carried no weight, claiming she had been swerving, that she looked nervous, that her calmness was suspicious in itself. His tone grew louder, echoing against the quiet street. The one simple stop was shifting into something heavier, something meant to break her composure. She stayed steady, her voice level, her posture still, refusing to match his aggression. Yet the tension between them was thick, the kind that pulls strangers in. A couple walking their dog slowed, pausing on the opposite sidewalk to watch. Curtains in nearby houses shifted as lights flicked on, faint shadows moving behind windows. The officer placed his hand on the edge of the car door, rattling it slightly as if testing her reaction. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut. His words were not a request, but a performance, loud enough for the growing number of onlookers to hear. A man across the street pulled out his phone, the faint glow of a recording screen, capturing the flashing lights and the raised voice. She took a slow breath, her fingers resting gently on the steering wheel. She asked calmly if she was being detained, if there was a lawful reason for his command. The officer scoffed, shaking his head, repeating that she was under suspicion. His eyes flickered briefly toward the people watching, and in that glance she recognized the show of power. He was no longer addressing her alone. He was speaking to the crowd, building his authority on intimidation. Inside the car, her mind was clear. The insult of the situation pressed against her, but she refused to allow it to shake her. Her voice stayed even, her movements deliberate. Every time he raised his tone, she answered with restraint, a contrast that made the imbalance more obvious. The people gathering could feel it too. Their murmurs carried across the road, some shaking their heads, others whispering under their breath. The officer's demands grew louder, his body leaning closer, the red and blue lights flashing wildly across his pale face. His shadow fell across her lap as he ordered her once more to step out, his words laced with force. But though the crowd felt the rising storm, her calm remained, an anchor in the chaos. She knew the moment was reaching its peak, and though the officer thought himself in control, the ground beneath him was already beginning to shift. The officer's voice sharpened until it cut through the air like a blade. He barked the words that she was under arrest, though nothing in the interaction had justified the declaration. The crowd shifted uneasily, the tension snapping like static through the night. His tone was not one of procedure but of domination, an attempt to strip her of dignity in front of witnesses. Before she could respond, he reached abruptly for her wrist, his grip rough and possessive. The crowd gasped as he tried to drag her from the car, forcing her toward the hood with a strength meant more to humiliate than restrain. His hand fumbled for the cuffs at his belt, the metal glinting under the flashing patrol lights. He sneered as he bent her arm forward, his voice laced with venom. "You have no power here," he spat, his words designed not as law but as cruelty. The onlookers stirred, their murmurs rising in volume. Phones were raised higher, the glowing screens capturing every detail of the struggle. A woman in the crowd whispered sharply that this was wrong, while another man muttered that she had done nothing to deserve it. The sound of recording apps clicking open filled the air, the modern chorus of resistance. The officer glanced sideways at the gathering but did not loosen his hold. His pride demanded that he finish what he had started, even as the evidence was stacking against him with every second. Pressed against the cool metal of her own car, she refused to cry out. Her body tensed, but her face remained composed, her jaw set with quiet defiance. Though his grip was strong, her silence was stronger. She would not give him the reaction he sought, the show of fear he wanted to parade before the crowd. Instead, her eyes locked on the lenses pointed at her, sending a message without words. She was not broken, not powerless, not defeated. The red and blue lights strobed across the scene, painting faces in stark colors. Some in the crowd shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered encouragement under their breath, urging her to hold on. The hum of traffic slowed as passing cars noticed the spectacle, drivers craning their necks to see. The officer tightened his hold, determined to prove his authority, but every second of his aggression only revealed the truth more clearly. This was not law. This was humiliation. And yet, through the press of his hand and the weight of the cuffs, she held her dignity intact. She knew that power built on cruelty is fragile, and that what he believed was control was slipping from his grasp with every word he uttered, every sneer that escaped his lips. The night had not yet revealed its turn, but the crowd could sense it coming, and their whispers carried the promise that this moment would not belong to him forever. The crowd leaned closer as the officer pressed her against the hood, his voice sharp and commanding, his posture heavy with false authority. She drew in a long, steady breath, her body rigid but her mind clear. Instead of giving him the panic he expected, she asked one question, her voice calm and deliberate. Was she being lawfully detained? The words hung in the night air, measured and exact. Spoken not as a plea, but as a statement of awareness. The officer scoffed, his lip curling into a sneer. He repeated his claim that she was under arrest, though his voice cracked slightly under the weight of the question. His tone grew louder, as if volume could replace legitimacy. The crowd shifted again, whispers growing louder, and the faint glow of more recording phones dotted the darkness. His smirk returned, fueled not by confidence but by the belief that no one would intervene. To him, she was only a woman on the side of the road, alone against his badge and authority. But she did not yield. Her face remained calm, her eyes steady, her posture unbroken. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her jacket pocket. Every movement was measured, her voice narrating each step so the crowd could hear. She announced that she was retrieving her phone, her tone steady as if she were dictating evidence. The officer's smirk widened, convinced that her call would fall into silence, that no one could override his dominance here. His hand tightened on her wrist, but she did not falter. Her fingers closed around the phone, pulling it free with the same care she had shown in every action. The screen lit her face, casting a glow that highlighted her composure. She scrolled with precision, her thumb moving without hurry. Around them, the crowd's whispers rose higher, the anticipation sharp as a blade. People leaned forward, some daring to step closer, their cameras steady, their attention fixed on her calm defiance. The officer chuckled under his breath, mocking her in front of the onlookers. "Call whoever you want," he spat, as if daring her. His smirk was wide, his posture arrogant, his belief in his power unshaken. Yet she did not look at him. Her gaze remained on the screen, her breathing slow, her face unwavering. She had no need to meet his sneer with anger. Her silence carried more weight than his shouting ever could. The night had become a stage, the flashing lights painting the scene in harsh reds and blues, the crowd murmuring like an audience on the edge of revelation. The officer believed he had control, that her call was meaningless, that the crowd was powerless. But as her finger pressed the screen and the phone lifted toward her ear, a new energy swept through the air. Calm defiance had taken the place of fear, and though he could not see it yet, the tide was already turning against him. The officer's smirk lingered as if he had already won, but her composure did not crack. She held the phone steady in her hand, her thumb moving with quiet precision. No one around her expected what came next. The crowd leaned closer, recording screens glowing in the red and blue light, waiting for her to call a lawyer, a family member, or perhaps emergency services. Instead, she pressed one contact at the very top of her list. The line clicked and her voice rose firm and clear into the night. The words she spoke were measured, commanding, and unmistakable. She was not calling for help in desperation. She was addressing the White House directly. The effect was immediate. Conversations in the crowd stopped mid-sentence, whispers dying in throats as people realized what they had just heard. The onlookers, who moments earlier had shaken their heads in pity or murmured in anger, now stared with widened eyes. Her tone was neither pleading nor frantic. It was steady, authoritative, the kind of voice used by someone accustomed to being listened to. She stated her name, gave the location, and calmly described the situation as if reciting details for an official report. Her composure was unshakable, even as the officer's face shifted from arrogance to unease. He tried to interject, scoffing loudly, insisting she was wasting her time, but his voice carried less conviction now. The crowd was silent, every phone pointed at him as his sneer faltered. The woman on the hood of her own car stood taller in that moment, her dignity radiating. She was no ordinary driver, pulled at random on a quiet street. Her phone call revealed a truth no one had expected. She carried connections that reached the highest seat of power in the nation. The contrast was jarring, the balance of power shifting before everyone's eyes. The officer, who moments ago believed he controlled the night, was now exposed as small and reckless in the face of something much larger. The murmur of the crowd returned, but it was different now. It carried disbelief and awe. People whispered to each other, repeating the words they had heard, confirming that she had indeed said White House. Some lowered their phones slightly, realizing they were capturing history in real time. Others stepped closer, wanting to be part of the moment. The officer shifted on his feet, his grip on the cuffs loosening slightly, though he did not yet release her. His smirk flickered, a fragile mask that no longer convinced anyone. He muttered something about procedure, but his words no longer carried authority. He was overshadowed, not just by the flashing lights of his own cruiser, but by the calm voice of the woman who had reminded everyone present that true power is not measured in volume or intimidation. It is measured in presence, in connections, and in the ability to remain steady when others expect you to break. The silence that followed her call was heavier than any insult, heavier than any command. She had turned the moment into something far beyond a traffic stop. She had transformed it into a revelation. The officer's face drained of color as the reality sank in. His grip faltered, and for the first time that night, his voice carried no conviction. He had thought himself untouchable, but the calm voice on the phone and the weight of her words had undone the mask of authority he had worn. The flashing lights from his cruiser still bathed the street in red and blue, but the glow no longer seemed to favor him. It painted him exposed, every flaw of arrogance visible to the crowd gathering closer. The minutes that followed stretched with tension. The hum of engines grew louder from down the road, headlights approaching fast. Backup had been called, but not for the reason the officer imagined. When the cars pulled up, doors opened, and uniformed officials stepped out with an urgency that was different, sharper. They moved past the crowd, nodding respectfully at those recording, then approached the woman with measured professionalism. Their words were clear, their tone deferential. They greeted her by name, asked if she was unharmed, and listened as she explained the situation with calm precision. The officer staggered back. Confusion etched across his pale face. He tried to speak, but the words collapsed in his throat. One of the officials raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence, and directed him aside. His posture shrank as questions began to fire at him, each one dismantling the shaky foundation he had built. He stammered excuses, muttered about suspicion, about procedure, but his voice was drowned out by the clicking of cameras and the steady recording of dozens of phones capturing his unraveling. Gasps rippled through the onlookers as the scene transformed before their eyes. Only moments earlier, they had watched a woman pressed against the hood of her car, accused and demeaned. Now they saw officials address her with respect, her authority undeniable, while the officer who once sneered was forced to account for his actions. The story was shifting in real time, and they were witnesses. The crowd pressed closer, their murmurs rising into open commentary. Some called out encouragement to her. Others jeered at the officer, reminding him that his arrogance had led to this collapse. The light of phone screens multiplied, every angle captured, every reaction preserved. The air was charged with the knowledge that what was happening would not remain a secret on a quiet street. It would spread, carried by video and word of mouth, a lesson carved into memory. The woman remained composed, her voice level, her posture unshaken. She did not gloat, did not raise her tone. She stood with the same dignity she had carried from the moment the lights first flashed in her rear-view mirror. The collapse of his power did not need her to celebrate it. It was evident in the officer's face, in the way his eyes no longer met hers, in the way his words fell flat against the quiet authority surrounding her. What began as a humiliation had transformed into a reckoning. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had crumbled entirely, leaving the officer exposed, and leaving the woman as a figure of calm strength, the center of a story that would echo far beyond that single night. She stood in the middle of the flashing lights, the phone still warm in her hand, her jacket slightly wrinkled from where she had been pressed against the hood. With a small motion, she straightened it, smoothing the fabric as though wiping away the weight of the officer's grip. The officials did not hurry her, did not push for answers. They knew she had already said enough. Behind her, two uniformed men escorted the officer toward his cruiser, his head low, his steps heavy. The man who only minutes before had barked commands now walked in silence, stripped of his certainty. The crowd was alive with whispers. Their voices blended into a current that carried awe and disbelief. People replayed the events to each other in hurried tones, pointing toward the woman with their phones still recording, repeating the moment when she had calmly spoken into her phone and changed everything. They spoke of her with respect, their murmurs transforming into something more than gossip. Already, the story was taking on the rhythm of legend, carried by the astonishment of those who had witnessed it. She looked around at the faces, at the phones capturing her stillness, and she remained composed. There was no smug smile, no shout of victory. Her dignity was the sharpest contrast to the humiliation she had endured. She had not raised her voice, had not let anger dictate her movements, and that grace now defined the moment, more than the flashing lights or the escort of the disgraced officer. The onlookers leaned closer as if to draw strength from her calm. Some nodded with quiet admiration, others clutched their phones tightly, as though unwilling to lose what they had captured. A woman in the crowd whispered that she would tell this story to her children, a reminder that composure can stand taller than cruelty. A man muttered that the officer had thought he held all the power, yet it had collapsed like sand beneath him. As the night settled again, the sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind only the murmurs of the people and the steady hum of the streetlights. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, her movements unhurried, her shoulders relaxed. To her, it was simply another act of endurance, another moment where dignity had to outlast aggression. But to the crowd, it was something far greater. It was a living testament that humiliation could be met with composure, that strength does not always roar but sometimes whispers with perfect clarity. What began as an attempt to strip her of power ended with her standing unbroken, admired not only for the connections she revealed but for the way she carried herself when those connections were hidden. The officer's downfall was not her triumph alone. It was proof to everyone watching that injustice does not always get the final word. And as the people drifted away into the night, their voices carried her story further, ensuring it would be told again and again, not as a traffic stop gone wrong, but as the night a woman turned humiliation into unshakable power.